Welcome back to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your co-host, Christina Dees, and this is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. And Dr. Ryman, why do we show up every week? Why do we do this thing that we do and bring education to the people out there?
Because boy, is it needed.
Telling
You
me.
know, it can be so difficult to find good, reliable information about cannabis on the internet. And not only is it censored on most social media platforms, even the education is censored on most social media platforms. There are so many folks out there that consider themselves experts that if you Google a question about cannabis, you're going to get at least 100 different responses. And many of those responses are going to completely contradict each other. So you can't really rely on what your friend tells you or what Google tells you or even what ChatGPT tells you. You need someone that's going to tell you the truth. And that is where we come in. We are here to deliver science-backed, evidence-informed information about all of your most pressing cannabis questions, usually in around 15 minutes or less, so that you can get what you need and get on with your day. You can think of us as your kick-ass granddaughters or your really cool aunties, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
That's right. And we do try to keep it in 15 minutes or less because we know your time is valuable. But sometimes we got really important topics that just takes more time. So thanks for sticking with us. And this episode couldn't come at a more opportune time. You know, plant lovers, get ready. We're going to decode another cannabis mystery. This time we're cracking open the curious case of THCA, the cannabinoid that sounds like THC, but plays a whole different set of rules. What is it? What does it do? And why hasn't it taken over the spotlight yet? Well, let's dive into it. Dr. Ryman, with so many intoxicating hemp products advertised online, available in states with no legal cannabis program, like North Carolina, many of you have likely seen the ingredient THCA. Legally, it's a plant defined as a federally legal hemp plant must have less than 0.3% THC. So, how does this relate to THCA? How are they doing it? Is it the same thing? Does THCA get you high or does it show up on a drug test? Well, today we're going to dive into the cannabis buzzword. So, Dr. Ryman, what exactly is THCA?
Well, THCA is simply the acid form of THC. So each cannabinoid has an acid form and a non acid form. When the cannabinoid is in the raw plant, it's in its acid form. So THC is THCA, CBD is CBDA, et cetera, et cetera. In order to transform this cannabinoid into its non acid form, THC, CBD, CBG, CBC, the molecule has to be heated. And this causes the acid molecule to fall off through a process called decarboxylation. And what you are left with is sometimes called its activated.
Okay, so in the raw plant, the cannabinoid's in its acid form, THCA, so that's naturally occurring in the plant. And then once it's heated, the acid falls away, becomes THC, delta 9. How does that impact the effect?
So for psychoactive cannabinoids like THC, the psychoactivity is not present in the acid form. So THCA will not get you high. If you eat a raw bud, it will not get you high because the THC in it is still mostly THCA. So if I were to pick up a handful of buds and put them in my mouth and chew them up and swallow them, I would not get the same effect as if I took those buds, heated them in the oven, turned them into butter, and then made brownies out of them. So now, of course, there are lights used to grow a plant, whether we're talking sunlight or whether we're talking about artificial light, and that does produce some heat. So some of that THCA becomes THC while it's still in the plant, but very little. Raw buds are still mostly THCA rather than THC.
Well, does THCA have therapeutic properties like THC does?
It does. So
Okay.
THCA has anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective qualities. Some research on THCA has also shown potential for as an anti-seizure medication, as anti-nausea medication. But like most components of the cannabis plant that we've talked about on this show a lot, research is limited by the Schedule 1 status. Probably, as I mentioned, most importantly, THCA does not get you high, so there's very little risk of overdose, similarly to CBD. So if you're somebody that's looking to try the therapeutic benefits of THC, but you don't want the intoxicating effect, then finding a tincture or juicing, as we're going to talk about, the cannabis plant itself, or getting a THCA tincture is a good way to go. Now, if you are ingesting it through juicing, you might get an upset stomach if you take too much because there's chlorophyll and other things in that raw juice. So that could be an issue. So don't go drinking like gallons and gallons of cannabis juice. But there are definitely therapeutic benefits to THCA.
Yeah, I've had raw cannabis juice before, usually like a shot, like a tiny, it tastes just like green juice with a hint of that skunky flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like taking any other plant and putting it in a juicer and drinking it. It's really the closest you can get to ingesting the whole plant and all of its beneficial components. So when you dry cannabis or when you heat it in order to decarboxylate the THCA and make it THC, some of the cannabinoids and terpenes and other constituents are lost or degraded. At the same time, over time, cannabinoids and terpenes also degrade. So basically, the plant is a living thing. As soon as you cut it down, it begins to die, right? So as soon as it's separated from its living plant, then that degradation process begins. So if you're cutting that plant down and immediately juicing the fresh raw cannabis, it's basically like eating it off the stalk. And it's not going to get you high because the THC has not been decarboxylated. So if you're looking to get really every single thing that's in that plant while it is still alive on the stalk, on the stem, then juicing it is going to give you that.
All right, well, let's talk about hemp because we all know that cannabis and hemp are the same plant with a different legal definition. So, how does THC play into the federal hemp loophole?
Well, I think we've talked about this before. We have an episode on hemp derived products. We also have an episode on Delta 8. It's really all about semantics, right? So, hemp, as we mentioned, is defined as a cannabis plant containing less than 0.3% THC, not THCA. They define THC, right? When they give that definition. So, a lot of hemp companies have exploited this by selling hemp flower. You see my quotes there, that is indeed less than 0.3% THC, but can have upwards of 20% THCA and calling it federally legal. So when you walk into a cannabis dispensary, at least how it was in California, and you look at a test, it's going to say 15% THCA, 4% THC, total THC 19%, which means the THCA plus the THC. Because once you light that on fire, the THCA is going to convert to THC. Now, what hemp companies are doing is they're saying, look, this plant is only 0.2% THC. It might be 10% THCA, but that's not included in the definition. So we're going to call this hemp flower, even though we know as soon as it's lit on fire or heated, that 10% THCA is going to convert into THC and therefore become intoxicating. So it can be marketed as a federally legal hemp product, even though it has enough THCA in there to be intoxicating once that is lit on fire. And then there's another whole issue with edibles that we could do a whole other show on that talks about 0.3% THC by weight. So it's like 1 milligram can have 0.3% THC. So if you have a 100 milligram package, how much THC can that have? So again, there's a lot of kind of figuring out how to get around this very specific definition of what is cannabis. And some states have banned these types of products completely. Other states, especially those that have no cannabis laws at all, except for prohibition, have taken more of a hands-off approach, which is what I think you're seeing over there in North Carolina.
Exactly. And it's interesting the timing of this episode because just last night I had dinner with a friend. She is a dentist. She doesn't smoke. She doesn't do cannabis. She's not her thing. She doesn't need it. She says she's chill naturally, but she does have trouble sleeping. And so she had a patient recommend to her THCA and not knowing anything that what it is or where it comes from. She maybe knew a little bit, but not enough, right? And she said, I went online, found it, ordered it, it came in the mail. I looked at the directions, I took a capsule, and she said she forgot. She took it. And so, like 2 hours later, she started to feel it, started to come on, and then it hit her. And she freaked out. And she called a friend who is experienced in cannabis. And the friend was in New York. So the friend had another friend in town, sent her over to the house. That friend was experienced enough, thankfully, to know to go to the store and buy black peppercorns. Because if you don't know, it's one of the things that you can do to sort of absorb some of the psychoactive feeling. You chew black peppercorns in your mouth and you swallow the saliva, not the peppercorns. And so she did do that, and they did set and setting, so they got some chill music, they like got a cool towel for her. She did not want to get in the cold shower, and they sat with her until she was able to calm down, which took a long time. Her first thing was like, how do I make this go away? And they're like, you don't. Like you're in it for the ride. There's no off switch. And so it was really scary for her. And, she kept seeing things. She couldn't close her eyes. The room was spinning. And I can imagine how scary that must have felt. And I think the saddest part for me is that she now associates that experience with cannabis and will have a bad rap or a bad feeling towards cannabis, and it shouldn't be that way. And that's what we're dealing with in North Carolina, is because we don't have access. People are going online, or they're going to the smoke shops or the vape shops, and they're just buying products like THCA, not knowing anything about it, reading the directions, taking it, and these things happen.
Yep. Well, that's unfortunate. And it is also unfortunate that it's going to sour her feelings towards using cannabis for sleep, or using cannabis for inflammation, or some of the other conditions and symptoms that we know cannabis can be really beneficial for, and is a lot safer than some of the other options out there. But I think that your point is really well illustrated, when we think about what happens in these markets that do not have any access to cannabis at all, meaning they don't have a regulated cannabis system. They don't have dispensaries where people can go and buy tested products by licensed companies. So they go online, they Google, which we say in the intro to this show, you shouldn't do.
Yeah. Get an expert patient.
And then they find these products and they may have a really pretty label, or they say, physician approved, or they say clinically tested, all these buzzwords that people use to try to sell products. And, what she bought could have been THC. It could be that she didn't look at the label and know that there was a difference between THC and THCA. So she bought something thinking it was THCA, but it was actually THC. It could be a company that's selling THC but masquerading as a THCA product so they don't get in legal trouble. It could be a company that's saying, oh, this is only 5 milligrams per pill, but in actuality, it's 20 milligrams per pill. You're taking it in pill form, as we've talked about on this show. It's going through the liver. So it's becoming Delta 11, and it's going to have more of a psychedelic effect than a typical getting high from cannabis effect. So, these are all issues that are one of the reasons why we do this show, right? Because we want people to have the information that they need in order to make good decisions about the products they use. So, really, this is just another chapter in the story of intoxicating hemp products and that loophole. First we saw Delta 8, which we've talked about on this show, which is not naturally occurring in the plant at all, but is rather synthesized from CBD. And then when the rules started happening at the state level, and the DEA put out a memo saying that anything not naturally occurring in the plant was considered a controlled substance, we started to see this shift towards THCA, which is naturally occurring in the plant, but still isn't included in the 0.3% THC rule. The farm bill is so broad that companies have been pushing the limits. And so far, little, if any, enforcement action's been taken. So there's really no reason for them to stop now.
Well, we do have a great show about hemp-derived cannabinoids that everybody should check out. So can we talk about drug tests? So, if THCA converts, will it show up on a drug test? If I juice raw cannabis, will it show up?
So usually no. Most of the time, drug tests are specifically looking for Delta 9 THC metabolites and not THCA. However, as I mentioned, the light source from the plant can provide heat, which does convert some of the THCA into THC. So even though the product may not make you feel high, if you drink it or use it every day, it's possible that some of the THC is entering your system. Another issue, as you just mentioned, is that you could be getting a product that says it doesn't have any THC in it, but it's not tested. And so you don't know for sure that it doesn't have any THC in it. So I always recommend that if you know you're going to be drug tested, test yourself first. So at least you know what to expect when you go in to take a drug test. And if you know in advance that you're going to be drug tested, it is a good idea to abstain from any THCA or THC product for at least 30 days before.
It sounds like the easiest solution here would just be to legalize cannabis at the federal level.
You know, a lot of people, and myself included, might argue that legalizing hemp already did that. Right. As we mentioned, it's really a matter of semantics. The cannabis plant and the hemp plant are the same plant. The only difference is the level of Delta 9 THC that is in the plant. So, right now, companies have to kind of skirt the fact that they're just growing low potency cannabis by taking advantage of all the loopholes that we've mentioned in order to sell federally legal intoxicating products. But the truth is that the 2018 Farm Bill effectively legalized cannabis, just in very limited and plant specific ways. So it legalized the cannabis plant as long as that cannabis plant has less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC. But a lot of the quality issues that we're talking about, like what happened with your friend, consumer safety issues, would be addressed if the feds just said cannabis and hemp are the same plant. Both are federally legal. The potential for intoxication is going to impact age restrictions and public use regulations. But as a crop, they are the same plant. So if we were to just admit that and say they're grown the same way, they have the same requirements for safe cultivation and manufacturing practices. And then when we get to the level of distribution and retail, we're like, all right, if it's got more than this amount of THC, it has to be sold in this kind of place to these people who are of age. If it has less, then we can sell it in a slightly different way. I mean, when you look at things like non-alcoholic beer and non-alcoholic wine and the difference between Robitussin that's prescription strength and Robitussin that's over-the-counter strength, like, this isn't weird. Like, we do this all the time. We have different versions of the same product, and some are available to some people and some are available to other people. But the way that we regulate the production of these products is the same. Your good manufacturing practices are going to be the same for a plant with 10% THC as it is for a plant that has 0.2% THC. You still want all the solvents to be removed from the oil. You still want the packaging to be clearly labeled and to have any warnings on it. All of that's the same. You know, really the only difference is how old do I have to be to walk up and purchase this product, and where is this product located in the retail space? So if we would just admit that instead of playing these games, I think we wouldn't see as many situations as like what happened to your friend, because she'd be able to walk in to any dispensary and say, I want a THCA product. And she would get a product that's been tested, that has good manufacturing practices, that has correct dosing and potency guidelines. And she wouldn't have had the experience she had.
I mean, I think you said it. You hit the nail on the head. It's about safe access, right? If it were legal, we would have safe access where products would be tested. You know what you're getting. It is what it says on the label that's inside the product. And I think that's what people really, truly want anyway.
Oh, absolutely. But as long as we have this kind of shell game that we're playing with the federal government about hemp, you can bet that companies are going to seek out more and more loopholes and ways to get around the 0.3% Delta 9 THC rule. They're going to synthesize intoxicating cannabinoids that don't exist in the plant. They're going to play around with definitions. And at the end of the day, the people that really puts at risk are the consumers, because they may be getting products that aren't safe. They may be getting products that are going to make them intoxicated when they don't expect to be. And I think you were really right. At the end of the day, people just want to know that the product they're taking is as advertised, that it's going to have the effect that they expect, and that it's going to be safe.
Here, you heard it first. Your cool aunties know what's up. We're trying to take care of you. We're trying to help you. That's a wrap on today's THCA deep dive. So who knew cannabinoid could be so intriguing without bring the buzz. If your curiosity is still sparking, drop us a line, info@mypersonalplants.com. We love hearing from you. We can't say that enough. Fan mail, we love that too. Don't forget to explore the YouTube garden. We've got more wisdom there, more plant-powered insights. Subscribe, like, hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss these episodes. We got some really good ones lined up this year. Until next time, stay curious, stay green, and keep those questions blooming.